Clicking stars, part 2. In this lesson we will continue from where we've left off last time, where we created all of the boilerplate code we'll need, like these three methods: clicking stars, clicking sun, fade star, and the boilerplate code for our types and our functions related to our types, like the star and the sun. And we have this: all the stars are in the same place, all the sun is in the same place, the sun is in where we set it. So we'll need to fix that. We'll need them to be in a random position, click them, whatever. If you haven't watched the first video, go ahead and watch it. So I'll just jump right into it. So to make them appear in a random position, we'll have to put them in a random position when we create the star here. So we'll need to implement this method, random position for stars. So first thing we'll do is we'll send it something in its parameters, in its argument, s as star. So it needs to get a star, and the star has all we need. It has the position of the star in the star array and the star's actual sprite, the app GameKit sprite, basically the image you see. So let's see. So we need to get the star from the stars array. Star array at the position of s dot star id. Remember, that's the position of the star in the star array. We talked about this in the last lesson. Now we'll need its x. X equals random 0 to 300. I just chose two arbitrary numbers, and we'll do the same for the x. And then we'll set the sprite position. Set sprite pose. For the sprite position, its first argument is the sprite ID. How do we get the sprite ID? Simply, we'll copy this and we'll ask for the ID. Dot sprite ID. That's it. Now we can manipulate the position of the star on the screen. So we have the star as data, and then we have the star as graphic, as the sprite. Let's see. So we'll need to get the star's x, the new x, and the new y, which we reset here to something random. So now we'll get rand pose and use it here. And pause, and we'll pass to it s, the star we created. Let's see it in action, and we got an error. What did I do wrong? Forgot to put a comma. Okay, let's run it again to see it works. Yeah, so every time the stars appear in a random position. Let's do the same for the sun. For the sun random position, we'll have to pass it a sun object, s as sun. The reason I'm not using this, well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them is I can't pass a general object in app GameKit because there is no such thing. These are user custom created types objects, so yeah, you'll need to choose one type. Second, sun doesn't have an array. It's inside, it's one global variable. So we actually don't even need this, but we'll use it anyway. We can just use like sun underscore, but that will make it less dynamic because it will depend on this variable. we want it to be used on any sun object. So s dot x, it also has x, y, and sprite ID, equals basically this. So we'll just copy paste it. Change the y, and we'll need set sprite position. Basically the same 3 lines of code, and we'll ask for the sun's sprite ID. The sprite ID. Okay, let's see what else. S dot x and s dot y. So for that we'll get rand pos2, and we'll use it after we create the sun. Sun underscore, and it should be in a random position. Yeah, let's try it again. Yeah, great, it works. So now we'll need to handle what happens when we click a star in the stars.agc. So again, I don't think we'll need to pass it an argument. No need for an argument, because we'll get the star when we click it. So we'll get the star ID, the star sprite ID, and then we can get the star object after we get this star ID when we click it. So first let's get the click. If it sounds weird, let me explain it better. So we click a star, we get its sprite ID, and by its sprite ID we can find the star in the stars array. Maybe we won't even need that. We'll see. Get pointer pressed. I don't think we need to do equals 1, because 0 and 1 is like false and true. It's like a boolean in AppGameKit. I know. So we'll need to get the sprite ID to manipulate it, to like send it to a random position. So the way we'll do that, let's see. Get sprite hit, and now we'll need to make a test between two basically what this does, you give it sprite. Well, basically let's go to the commands, and this will be much clearer. So it gets an x and y, and it gets you, like, if there's a sprite in that x and y position, it will return that sprite's ID. So our x and y will be where we clicked. So it will be get pointer x. It might be the mouse pointer, or you know, wherever you clicked on the smartphone, and get pointer y. So basically, if there's a sprite where you clicked on the x and y position, return its sprite ID. If not, it will be 0. Let's make sure it's not the sun, because it can give us the sun's sprite ID. We don't want that. So if SID is equals to sun dot sprite id, then exit function. So if we click on the sun, it will exit the function. We want this to be used for clicking stars, not suns. So because we have one sun, there's no problem. We get its sprite ID, and we compare it to the sprite ID we clicked. Moving on. Do I need to explain what exit function does? Just exit the function. So we'll need another if. Wait. So let me explain. There's another thing I want to show you. So we'll get the sprites ID, right? Only for stars, because if we click sun, it will exit. So we get the star sprite ID. How do we get the star ID, its position in the star array? Easy. Sprite ID is the star ID plus 1. So if we do -1, we get the star's position in the array. So it will be like this: I equals SID -1. So basically we click on a star, we get its sprites ID, we do -1, we'll get its star ID, its index in star array. And we'll also need to worry about another thing. If I is smaller than 0, I think even smaller equals. No, 0 is okay. Because 0 is an index in an array, it's the first index in an array. Then exit function. So just in case we click something, I don't know. This is just a precaution. I don't think it will happen, but just in case that, I don't know, we click... no, I don't think it will happen, but, you know, it's better to have a precaution than not have a precaution. Increment points. Inc points. So add 1 to points when we click a star. Do we show points anymore? Yeah. So let's see what this will do. So whenever we click a star but not the sun, it will increment our points. But now we want the star to go to a random position. So that's the last thing we need to do here. And pause. How do we get the star? Star array at the position of I. I is short for index, which is the index of the star we clicked in the array. Remember, if we click on a sprite using this function, get sprite, and the pointer x and y, like check if there's a sprite at some x and y, in this case the pointer x and y. So if there's a sprite, return its sprite ID. So we get the sprite's ID, but we want to get the sprite's index. So all we need to do is reduce it by -1, and we'll get the star's index. This works great in this sort of game, because we don't have many objects, so we can do this sort of thing. But in different games we'll need a better system for finding objects. I have one. I'll show you when it's relevant. So now this mechanic works. The sun doesn't... oh, here it is. Okay, great. I want to do the click mechanic for the sun too. So when we click it, it will go to a different position. You know what, let's do fade star first. And then you'll see why we need the star array so much. Well, I think you already understand because we used it all over the project. Okay, if you don't understand, I'll explain it. Star array is very effective because it's an easy way to manipulate the data basically it holds the data of all of our game objects, of our star game objects, and lets us manipulate its position and yeah, get it when we click it. Yeah, and now it will help us to change the opacity. So yeah, it's very flexible, very usable, rather than creating each star on its own and yeah, that whole mess. That's a more dynamic way to handle a lot of objects. So we needed to loop all the stars and reduce their opacity. For I equals 0 to star array length, we want to loop and affect all the stars in star array. Next I. Let's see. The sprite ID is star array at the position of I dot sprite ID. We get it, so we'll be able to well, writing SID is easier than writing all of that. If get sprite color alpha, basically alpha is opacity, so we want to get the sprite's alpha to help us decide what to do next. SID is bigger than 2 because we're going to de-increment it by 1. So if the sprite's alpha is bigger than 2, do something. Basically make it not appear. Because we're going to de-increment the sprite's alpha, the sprite's opacity. We want to do something if it reaches below 2, like we don't want to de-increment it below 0, because what AppGameKit will do is reset the alpha to 255, which is visible. So let's see. Set sprite color alpha. Sprite ID and 0. And then we want to set the alpha in the star array to 0 too. So this current star, it's opacity alpha, potato, same thing. And we'll tell the array to continue. We don't want it to reduce the opacity. We're going to reduce the opacity here. So here it's a precaution, like if the alpha is less than 2, just make it invisible. Make it not visible. And go to the next star with continue. Don't reduce its opacity more. So we'll need set sprite color alpha. Sprite ID, and we'll need to get sprite color alpha of SID, like the value we're going to set, -2. Every tick, like every time the game loop runs, it will run fade out star and it will de-increment each star's opacity by 2. This line does that. And if it's smaller than 2, like, I don't know, 0, 1, -1, it will be not visible. And it will move on. It will like not continue de-incrementing it. And we want to set the opacity just in case we'll use it. somewhere. I don't think I ever used it, but it's good to save your, your entity's data. And that's it. Now this will make all the stars fade away. Or not, or make them go crazy. That's what I wanted to prevent with this. Because when it goes below 0, this happens. Let's see. Let's de-increment it by 1. So, this doesn't work. Let's see why. Smaller. Yeah. But you can still click them. That's annoying. So what we can do is get star at position I, opacity, and use it here. No, after that. If equals 0, exit function. Basically, if the star, yeah, that's the index, okay. So if the star we clicked opacity is 0, don't increment the points and don't do random position. Oh, I didn't write that. Let's see. Let's wait until it fades out and click on it. Great, I can't click on it when it fades out. Now all we need to do is make them visible when we click the sun. Let's see, click sun. So we'll need these two again. I use Shift Tab to remove all the tabs. Okay, great. So let's see. If SID is smaller than 50, then exit function. Meaning, if we click a star, exit the function. The sprite side is 51, so anything below 50 is a star. Then we'll need to loop the stars again to make them visible. You see how useful the stars array is? Next array. So what do we need? Set the color alpha back to 255. Let's see if this will work. Let's wait for them to fade out. Click. Nope, doesn't work. Why is that? Oh, we need the star at the position of I. And we'll need its sprite ID actually, because we want to manipulate a sprite, the star sprite, not in the sprites array. Okay, I see it works. You see it fades. I click the sun, it appears, but the sun stays in the same place. So we'll just do that. Rand pause. Rand pause 2, we already wrote this function to make the sun go to a random position on click, and we'll give it the sun's ID. Oh, it gets the sun. Sorry. It can't get an integer, it gets the sun. Okay, this will work now. And we can't click the stars. I know why. Because of this equals 0 by default. So we'll make the stars s dot opacity to 255 at the star. Let's see, it still doesn't work. Opacity 0. The opacity should be like bigger than, let's do bigger than 0. It's weird that it works like that. This should only like be true when it equals 0. No, it doesn't. Well, I think we have another problem. Let's wait for it to fade out. What a weird bug. Let's say smaller than 2. What a weird bug. Yeah, I don't have a debug, any way to debug it, because I can't print it. Basically, when opacity is 0, you can't click the star. But what it does is that you can't click the star anyway. Like even if the opacity is 255, and I don't have a way to debug if it's the opacity value. I'll have to create a string or debug as string. Yeah, it's that ridiculous that you need to create a way to debug stuff yourself. Let's see. I wanna see the star's opacity when I click it before it goes on str. And now you learn how to debug weird bugs. It's not global. It's ridiculous that you don't have a console log. So now we know the culprit. The opacity is never set to 255 here, which is weird because we set the star we get here to 255, and then we send it here into the array, and it should be 255. Found it. We set it to 0 every time we looked. Now we'll set it to the real sprites alpha. Now this problem shouldn't exist anymore. Now we can't click it, but when the sun appears, we can click it again, but when it disappears, we can't click it. And let's get rid of that. We don't need the debug for the game. Great, so now we have a working game. Perfect. And that's it for this lesson. If you have any questions, contact me, like in whatever platform this video will be. If you have comments or a way to message me for messages or a link or whatever, if there's a problem, contact me and I'll try to help and fix this tutorial or add another tutorial. And that's it for this lesson.